Welcome to a deep dive today. We're going to be looking at AI sex bots in 2025.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, this should be a good one. We found some really interesting sources for this one. We have a blog post that has some pretty shocking statistics. There's a podcast that kind of takes us back to the beginning of how this tech first emerged.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and we even found a YouTube interview with a neuroscientist who has some strong opinions.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see where all this is going and all the trends shaping the future. So let's dive in.
Well, it really is amazing just how fast this technology has been changing. It hasn't even been a decade, and we were just looking at basic prototypes back then. The podcast source actually called them silicone faces on sticks.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
And they played a clip too. It was a silicone face with a wig trying to eat a banana. Honestly, it was more funny than anything.
yeah. But what's interesting? Even back then, when it was just basic technology, it's clear there was a market for it. And then fast forward to now, we have these companions that look so real, and they use AI. The blog post we have actually talks about how the tech behind sensors and artificial muscles have gotten so good.
Mhm.
These bots can move and talk just like a real person.
Yeah, and the industry is just exploding. The blog actually mentioned some wild numbers. The global market for sex toys is worth over $35 billion. Like 35.2 to be exact. And sex robots make up a big chunk of that market. And it's expected to just keep growing too, like 25% growth each year.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, so clearly there's a ton of interest in this tech.
Definitely. It's not a niche thing anymore. I
Yeah.
mean, almost 1 in 5 people have tried a sex robot or they own one. It's like 17.4%.
Wow.
I mean, that is a lot of people. This isn't sci-fi anymore.
Right.
This is becoming normal.
Which brings up such a big question. What does all this mean for human relationships? Are these robots a threat or are they creating some new kind of intimacy? I don't even know. It's tough. And it gets even more complicated when you think about all the tech we already have. Like the neuroscientist in the YouTube interview, he thinks we're interacting less in real life because of social media and video games and the internet. All of that stuff. It fulfills some needs we have, but it also makes us more isolated.
Yeah, I see his point. And the blog also mentions this study that says like 30% of millennial men and 20% of millennial women haven't had sex in over a year. I wonder if that's because of technology. Hard to say for sure,
It
but
definitely makes you think.
yeah. And it seems like the way sex robots affect relationships depends on if someone is already in a relationship or not. The blog said that married people are the least interested in sex robots, and single people are the most interested. But the interesting thing is that over half of married people said that sex robots actually made their relationship less intimate.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this industry that's just booming. Relationships are changing, and we
Mhm.
don't really even know what it means for human connection. But what about mental health? I mean, are we going to end up isolated and addicted, or are there some benefits too?
Yeah, that's a really important point. The blog mentions that 60% of users say they feel better emotionally because of their robot companion. So it seems like for some people, these robots help with loneliness.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially if someone has social anxiety or they just feel more comfortable with something that doesn't judge them. But could it be a bad thing too? Like, could people start to rely on them too much?
Well, that's the other side of it. The blog says there's a 30% chance of single users getting addicted. So we have to be careful and use them in a healthy way. And that actually ties into what that neuroscientist was saying about how technology could make people more uncomfortable in real life. So if you rely too much on AI, could it be even harder to have relationships with real people?
It's a good point. It seems like anything you know. Moderation and self-awareness are important. But let's switch gears a bit. We kind of have to talk about the elephant in the room, the ethical stuff about sex robots. This is where it gets tricky.
Yeah, it definitely gets complicated. That neuroscientist on YouTube is really worried about this. He thinks there could be more sexual violence and that women will be objectified even more. He says these robots could make people with bad views even worse. He's not saying everyone will become a monster or anything, but we have to be aware of these things.
Right. It's about using this tech responsibly. The podcast also talks about how this could be bad for real romantic relationships.
And the body image stuff is a big deal too.
Hmm.
The neuroscientist compared sex robots to those filters on social media. He thinks they could make people have unrealistic expectations about beauty standards. Like we're creating these perfect people that don't exist.
Yeah.
And that could be really bad for self-esteem.
And then there's the issue of kids accessing this. The blog talks about platforms like Chub AI that could be used by kids. How do we even stop that? How do we keep inappropriate stuff away from them?
Yeah, it's really tricky. This tech is moving so fast and we're still trying to figure out the rules.
So where do we go from here? What does the future look like for intimacy with machines. I mean, it's exciting and scary at the same time.
Well, that neuroscientist thinks this is just the beginning. He says AI is changing so quickly that these robots will be just like humans. Like they'll be able to have real emotions and form bonds with us. He even mentioned the movie Ex Machina. Like, that could be the future.
I don't know about that. That movie was creepy.
Yeah.
But it does make you think, what's the difference between a machine and a companion if they can act just like us? And what happens to real relationships?
Exactly. And the neuroscientist actually said he was worried that humans could be replaced by AI. Like, we want to create new technology, but what if it ends up replacing us?
That's kind of scary when you think about it. I think it means we need to be really careful about how we use all of this new tech. We can't just ignore the consequences. We need to ask the tough questions now before it's too late.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's all about using AI in a responsible way.
Right. So how do we actually do that? What are the things we can do to make sure we're using this tech safely?
Well, the blog had some tips, like respecting boundaries and protecting privacy and taking care of the robots. But the funny thing is, they found that people are better at the hygiene stuff. Like, they're good at keeping the robots clean, but they don't care as much about data privacy.
So they're more worried about their robot getting a virus than their own information being stolen.
It's kind of ironic. I
Mm.
think it just shows that we're still trying to figure all of this out. People are excited about the possibilities, but they're also worried about jobs and getting too attached and having unrealistic expectations.
It feels like we're stuck between being fascinated and being scared. We want to see what this tech can do, but we're also nervous about what could happen.
It's a complicated situation that's always changing. And we have to be curious, but also careful.
I agree.
I think it's time we looked at some specific companies and the tech they're making.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about these real people simulations and female-sounding voice assistants. This deep dive is just getting started.
So let's jump into some of these companies that are like leading this whole AI sex bot thing. One that keeps coming up in our blog is Candy AI.
Oh, yeah, Candy AI. They're the ones with all those ads about AI companions people love or something, right?
Yeah.
I think they're focused on virtual sex bots, like for companionship and stuff. The blog said you can even like customize how they look and their personality.
Yeah, it's all about making it personal. You can basically design your perfect companion, whether you want a romantic partner or just a friend. Candy AI says they can give you emotional support and, sexual satisfaction, all in one package.
It's wild. It's like you're building your dream partner. I wonder if that could mess with people's expectations for real relationships, though.
That's a good question. The blog also talked about how sex bot use is different in different countries. It's interesting how culture and stuff affects how many people use them.
Yeah, for sure. The blog had some stats that were surprising. Like in the US, it's 15.3% of people who have had sex with a robot or own one, but then almost 41% think it's cheating. So even though AI companions are becoming more popular, there are still these like ethical lines and stigmas.
Definitely. And it seems like those lines are different depending on where you are in the world. Like the blog said, Europe has a higher rate of people using sex bots. It's 18.3%. They think it's because of Europe's diverse cultures and that they're more open to different kinds of intimacy.
Interesting. And then there's Japan. They're at 27.1%. It seems like they're really leading this whole AI sex bot thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The blog talked about a few reasons for that, like they have higher rates of loneliness and they're really into tech. And maybe they're just more accepting of robots as companions in general. Remember that video of the silicone face eating a banana?
Oh, yeah.
That was from Japan. Seems like they've been ahead of the curve on this for a while.
And speaking of ahead of the curve, we have to talk about teenagers. The blog was really concerned about teenagers using AI sex bots.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Teenagers are still figuring things out, so they're more likely to be influenced by technology. The blog was worried about things like addiction and being isolated and how it could affect their sexual development.
And their stats are pretty scary. Almost half of teenagers use voice assistants regularly. It's like 49.3%. It makes you wonder if they'll be more likely to use and even depend on sex robots because they're so used to AI.
Yeah, it's a real concern. And platforms like Chubb AI are even more problematic when you think about kids accessing them. We have to protect young people from this kind of stuff and make sure they're using this technology responsibly.
We can't just pretend it's not happening, especially for this generation that's growing up with AI everywhere. But let's go back to responsible use for everyone. The blog had some guidelines for safe interaction, like consent and boundaries and maintenance and data privacy.
Yeah, and it's funny how they found that difference in what people actually do. Like, people are good at keeping the robots clean, but they don't really care about data privacy.
So they're more worried about a virus on their robot than their own information.
It's kind of strange when you think about it.
It is.
I think it just shows that we're still figuring this all out. People are excited, but also worried about their jobs and getting too attached and having unrealistic expectations.
It's like we're fascinated and scared at the same time. We're interested in this tech, but also nervous about it.
Yeah, it's a brave new world,
Yeah.
and we're all trying to figure out how to live in it.
Okay, so we've talked about how sex robots have changed
Yeah.
and the ethics and how to use them responsibly. But the big question I have is, what does all this mean for intimacy in the future?
The big question, right? That neuroscientist from the YouTube interview had some interesting ideas. He thinks the future of intimacy might not be about finding the one, but about creating the perfect partner. Like someone who's exactly what you want and need.
So instead of finding your soulmate, you just make them.
Kind of. And he thinks that with AI getting so much better, we're getting to a point where robots will be basically human. Like they'll have real emotions and feelings.
Wow. That's amazing. And also a little creepy. Like, if a robot can understand and respond to your emotions, what does that mean for real human connection?
That's the debate, isn't it? The neuroscientist said he was worried about humans becoming obsolete. But he also had a more positive view. He said that maybe AI companions could actually make our relationships with other humans better, like by helping us understand ourselves better and what we need and want.
So it's not about humans versus robots, it's about them helping us evolve.
Exactly. He thinks AI could be like a mirror, showing us what it means to be human and helping us become more emotionally intelligent.
I like that idea. It's more hopeful. But it still brings up a lot of questions about consciousness and love and what it means to be human. It's a lot to think about.
It is. And while we're thinking about all that, we can't forget about how this tech is already affecting the world, like the legal stuff and the ethical debates and the social and economic impacts. AI sex bots are making us face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our relationship with technology.
It's like we're looking in a mirror. And what we see is exciting and scary at the same time. We're in uncharted territory here.
Definitely.
We're all trying to figure out what to do.
So speaking of figuring things out, I think we should talk about the more practical side of this technology.
You mean like how it actually works? Like if you bring a robot home, what's it like to use one?
Exactly.
Right.
Let's get into the details of how AI sex bots work and hear from people who are actually using them.
All right, so we've talked about like the big picture stuff,
Hmm.
like the trends and the ethical stuff and how this could all affect society. But now I kind of want to know how these AI sex bots actually work. Like what's going on inside them?
Yeah, well, you can think of it as a mix of really advanced robotics and some seriously smart AI software. It's like they took the body of a robot and gave it the brains of a computer program.
So it's like a Roomba had a baby with ChatGPT.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. The robotics part is what makes them move and have touch sensors and makes them look so real.
Okay, so they can move and they react to touch. But what makes them more than just a doll? Like how do they think?
That's where the AI comes in. That's what gives them personality and lets them learn what you like. They can have a conversation with you and even respond to your emotions.
So it's not just physical, it's about feeling a connection, maybe even companionship.
Exactly. And the tech is getting crazy good. Remember that neuroscientist we talked about? He thinks that eventually these robots will be just like humans.
It's like that movie Her, where Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with his AI assistant. Makes you think about what it means to have a relationship.
A big question.
Mm.
And it's one we'll have to keep thinking about as this tech keeps changing. But let's get back to reality for a second. The blog said that 60% of users said they feel better emotionally because of their robot companions. Why do you think that is?
I guess it's because it feels like you have someone there for you all the time. Someone who listens and doesn't judge you. Someone who always gets you. That's a powerful feeling, especially if you're lonely.
Yeah, that's important. For people who have trouble with relationships or have social anxiety, these robots can give them that connection they're missing. The blog even said that sex robots could be used as therapy for things like depression and anxiety.
Really? That's interesting. I think there's a lot of potential there. But we also have to be careful about the ethical stuff,
Oh,
too.
definitely. We need to be careful and do more research to figure out how to use them safely and what the risks are. And we can't forget about the downsides we talked about before, like getting addicted and having trouble connecting with real people. It's all about balance.
Right. Be mindful and responsible. But on a practical level, how do you even get one of these robots? Where do you buy them?
What's kind of tricky, remember that company in the YouTube interview? They actually went out of business because people were so judgmental about it.
It's sad that there's still so much shame around this. Hopefully people will get more comfortable with it as time goes on.
I hope so. But for now, most of it is online. And some companies that used to make realistic dolls are starting to add AI to them, like Real Doll.
So it's becoming more normal and more accessible, which means we need to think about rules and ethics and how to protect people.
Exactly. The easier it is to get them, the more careful we have to be.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have serious conversations about what this tech means and how to use it in a way that's good for everyone.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into AI sex bots in 2025, what's the one thing our listeners should take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is that this tech is here to stay,
Mm-hmm.
and it's changing faster than we realize. We can't be afraid of it. We have to be open-minded and think critically and be ready to learn and adapt.
It's not about stopping progress. It's about understanding the power of this tech and using it to make things better. We have to talk.
Exactly. We have to see both the good and the bad and have honest conversations about the ethics and what it means for society.
Well, listener, we've covered a lot today. From the history of sex robots to the big questions they make us ask about intimacy and the future of humanity. It's a complex and fascinating topic, and it's definitely not over yet.
And who knows, maybe someday soon, someone will ask you if you've met someone special. And you'll say, yeah, but they're charging right now.
That'll get people talking. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.